Hello folks, welcome to the Age of Asparagus. By the end of this video, we'll be able to make a single shot, a 3-round burst, or however many you want, as well as auto fire. And we'll also be able to create a spread effect by adding additional spawn points for the bullet. Well, this is going to be fun. Let's go to our gun script. So where do we got that? In our weapons. Let's go open our gun scene and check out our gun script. So currently we have a rapid fire, and that's basically the only option. We could change, in our gun, we could change how fast the bullets go, and we can change how often the bullets are fired, but that's about it. So let's start by creating a bunch of different states that a gun could be in, or just modes. And I'll do that here right before our ready method. I'll go enum, we'll create an enum, and I'll call it fire mode. And we'll give it, let's go start with single, and then these are constants, so I'm just doing them in all caps. And then we could have a burst mode, like a 3-round burst, or however many we want, and then we'll have a full auto mode. And then we can create a new export variable that we'll give it a type of fire mode, and we'll call it fire mode. And by default we can set it to, should we just set it to single? So let's go fire mode.single. There we go. And then if we go into the gun inspector, we'll see the 3 modes we just created. Alright, okay, so now let's start using these modes. To do that, we're going to need to know when the player is holding the trigger and when they release the trigger. So let's go before our shoot method. Let's add a couple functions. And that's going to handle when anything we need to do when they're holding the trigger. We'll do it in here. And then anything we need to do when they release the trigger, we can do in this function. So something obvious we're going to want to do when they're holding the trigger is we want to shoot. So let's run the shoot method there instead of calling the shoot method directly, which is what somewhere else in our game is calling shoot, right? So now instead what all we're going to do is we're going to tell the gun that the trigger is being held by calling this method. And we're going to need to know when the trigger is released. So we're actually going to want another variable here. Let's create another variable. We'll call it, this is just going to be a Boolean variable, and we'll call it trigger released. And it's just going to be true or false. Let's start it with true. When the game starts, they're not holding down the trigger. And so when you're holding the trigger, we'll set trigger released is false. And then when we release the trigger, we'll set it to true. Okay, so this isn't using any of our fire modes. It doesn't care about our fire mode yet. We're here, let's just try and get this trigger released toggle to work. So instead of calling the shoot method directly, which we're doing in our gun controller script here. So where does our gun controller script occur? It's part of our player. So our player has a gun controller, and the gun controller has a script here. So the gun controller shoots when something tells the gun controller to, and that's just passed on down to the equipped weapon to shoot. So the gun controller is going to need those same methods as well. So we can basically propagate down when the trigger is being held or not. Why don't we go back to the gun script, and we'll just add some methods here in the gun controller, and I'm going to get rid of shoot completely. We don't need that anymore. So we're going to have a function hold trigger. We don't need that. We don't need that. So what we do need, oh, I guess I could have kept it, because we do want to check if we have an equipped weapon. If we do have an equipped weapon, then what we'll do is we will, whoops. If we do have an equipped weapon, we're going to call its hold trigger method that we just created. And it doesn't know this is a weapon, so maybe let's, our equipped weapon here is a spatial. Let's give it a little more info here. I'm just going to, I'll just pass here for now. and we'll pass here. And then instead of saying a spatial, let's call it whatever a gun is. What did we call it? It doesn't have a class name. All right, let's give it a class name. Okay, so now in our gun controller, we can say the equipped weapon is a gun, and hopefully that will allow us to call the hold trigger method. And same thing, if we release the trigger, then we'll call the release trigger method. Okay, good. So when the gun controller is told that we're holding the trigger, it's going to go tell the gun to do the same thing. It's just propagating these down to the gun. And who tells the gun controller to shoot? That would be in the player script here where we handle all the inputs. So here we have shoot, shoot. Our primary action, we tell the gun controller to shoot. So instead of that, we'll just tell it that the trigger has been pressed. Hold trigger. And this is actually the right action, is action press. So as long as this is held down, we'll be calling the hold trigger method every frame, every physics frame. The difference here now is we're going to want an else statement, because if they're not holding it down, then we're going to want to call the gun controller's release trigger method. Okay, so the player, when we hit the primary action button, which is like our left click shooting, we're going to call the hold trigger method on the gun controller, which is going to call the hold trigger method on the gun, the equipped weapon, which is going to shoot. And then when we release the trigger, we're going to toggle the value of this trigger released Boolean variable, but really it's just going to stop shooting at this point. So let's just make sure we can still shoot. Everything should be the same at this point. I can shoot, and when I let go, it stops shooting. Good. So now we can start to use some of these different fire modes and handle them differently, almost like a little state machine kind of. Although I'm not sure we'll be switching states or if we'll just be actually creating different guns that have a different value here. We can worry about that later. So now in our hold trigger method, we're going to do different things depending on the value of our fire mode. So let's create a match statement here with the fire mode, and based on the fire mode, we'll start with firemode.single. We will do something, and then each of the different fire modes burst here, and auto. We'll just pass on all of them for now. And does that work? Okay. So by default here we're on, we set it to single. I'm just going to change it to auto, because basically that's already what we have, and let's just make sure auto works. So we're not going to do anything in these other modes right now, but we should be able to take the code we already had and let's just tab that into the auto mode and make sure everything still works like it did before. Good. Okay, so we have auto mode working. Why don't we try burst mode next? So we'll go, whoopsie, go to our gun. We can change it to burst mode. And now when we fire, nothing should happen. So, nope, I can't shoot. That's good. So what do we want to do here in burst mode? Well, we're going to take a number of shots, and then as long as there are shots remaining, we'll keep firing until we've used them all up, right? So maybe under here, I'm just going to put burst here because this is kind of our burst related variables. So let's export a variable here. We'll just call it burst shots. And we're going to want another variable that's going to hold the number of burst shots remaining. So I'll just call that burst shots remaining. Okay. Typeless export needs a constant. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, let's set it to 3. We didn't give it a type, but that's okay. We'll just give it a value of 3. That seems good. And then burst shots remaining. In our ready method, we're going to want to reset. We'll set burst shots remaining to the number of burst shots. to start, right? And in fact, you know, every time we shoot a burst, we're going to want to reset that to 3 again so we can do another shot. So it probably makes sense to just cut this here, and we'll call a method called reset bursts. And we'll just put that under the process here. We don't even need process. Let's get rid of that. We'll go function reset bursts. Paste that code there. Oopsie. Okay, so when we start our game, we'll have 3 burst shots remaining. So what does that mean here when we hold the trigger in burst mode? Ooh, my mouse is being jumpy. Well, let's check if we have burst shots remaining. If burst shots remaining. So remember, if this is 0, it'll be falsy and it won't happen. Then we'll shoot. And we will decrement burst shots remaining by 1. So, think this is going to work? I don't think so. So, 1. It shot 1 time. Okay. So here, why don't we go print? We'll go burst shots remaining. And see what happens. Okay, so I'm not holding the trigger, and then boom. Oh, yeah, it drops down to 0 so fast. So what's happening here is I click it once. I'm holding the trigger down, right? I can shoot once, but then you can see it every frame it goes 3, 2, 1, 0, even right after that first shot. And that's because even though it's trying to shoot here, if the timer hasn't timed out yet, then can shoot is still false. I don't know if you remember this from a long time ago. So basically we shoot, and then after we shoot it sets can shoot to false and starts a timer, because we don't want all 3 of those bullets coming out at the same time or like frame after each other, right? So actually they're only going to come out every 100 milliseconds. Now 3 frames are going to pass in that 100 milliseconds. Every frame, whether it actually shoots or not, is going to remove one of our burst shots, whether it actually shot or not. So I think what we're going to need to do here is we want to know if the shoot method actually shoots anything. So if we can get the shoot method to return a true or false value, like say return true if it shot, and false if it didn't shoot, then what we can just do is we could go like, we could go if shoot, so if we did a successful shot, then decrement it. Otherwise, keep trying to shoot until the timer's up. So let's get our shoot method to return true if it shoots, which would be basically this whole thing right here. So we'll return true. Otherwise, we'll return false. You can put this in an else statement if you like, not necessary. That might look a little cleaner. So if we can shoot, and then we do shoot, we'll return true. It'll know we took a real shot, and then only then will it decrement our shots. So this time, we should... Yay, 3-round burst! But I can't shoot anymore because I haven't reset it. So to reset this, we're going to want to call this reset bursts method when we release the trigger. So let's do that and see if we can shoot. 1, 2, 3. I'm holding the button down. Now I let go, push it again. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So I can kind of single fire here, or I can hold it down and I'll do 3-round bursts. And these are not strong enough to kill these guys. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And I think if I just do 1 and then I hold down, I'll just get 2. Oh, no, I got 3. That's neat. Oh yeah, because every time I lift up my trigger, it resets the bursts. Okay, that's great. Okay, so let's go to single fire mode now, which basically we're only going to shoot if trigger released is true, because you have to let go of the trigger before you can shoot again. And when you let go of the trigger, it'll set trigger release to true. So let's do that. We'll go if trigger released, then shoot. Get rid of this pass. Save that. Go to the gun and we'll change it to single. Let's see what happens. auto fire. Okay, well that's not what I wanted. And that's because the trigger release, setting the trigger release to false is only happening in the auto fire mode. Actually, we should pull that back because regardless of what fire mode we're in, we want to set trigger release to false every time we're holding it. So I think that'll actually solve the problem. So I'm going to click and hold, one shot, I let go, I click again, and then if I can hyper tap, you can get up to 100, you can get up to one shot every 100 milliseconds. Okay, so we got 3 working shot modes. Another thing I want to do is set up a spread shot so that we could shoot 3 at once, kind of like in a spray of bullets. So what we're going to do here, if we go to the guns, the 3D view of the gun here, I'm moving it up into the light because the black gun against the black backdrop is not good. Okay, so we have, where's our muzzle? So currently our muzzle is there. And what I want is I want to create 3 muzzles. Can I go to top view? Oh, there we go. That'll work. I'm going to grab this. See, there's our muzzle right there. Control Z back there. I'm going to want 3 different muzzles, actually. Well, I want 1 muzzle, but I want 3 places from which bullets will spawn. So let's change the type of this muzzle. We'll go change type, and we'll just change this to a spatial. We don't need the coordinates anymore. And then in the muzzle, we'll add some position 3Ds. There we go. And we'll call this one the bullet spawn center. So that's the one we already had. And we're going to duplicate this. Control D here. I'll call this bullet spawn left. Bullet spawn left will move over to the left a tiny bit, and we'll rotate it a tiny bit so the bullets will spray out in that direction. So let's go to the transform. That looks good. So my snap just worked out nicely, but a translation of 0.1 on the X and then rotate it by 10 degrees on the Y. And then we'll duplicate this one. Call this spawn right. Bullet spawn right. And we'll set the X translation to negative 0.1 and the degrees to negative 10. And there we go. We'll have 3. Now, we just need to get the bullets to spawn out of these bullet spawns, which are children of the muzzle. Okay, so let's save that and see if we can get this to happen. We're going to need, let's get a variable. Where should we put this? Let's just add it down here at the bottom. We'll have a variable which will hold the bullet spawns. And the bullet spawns is going to be a list. It'll be a list that will contain, it'll be an array that has our bullet spawns in it. So when in our ready method, we'll set our bullet spawns equal to the muzzle.getChildren. There we go. So now bullet spawn should be an array holding these 3 spawn points. And now when we go to shoot, this shouldn't matter what mode we're in, because if we have a spray weapon, it could be a single burst, a single fire, a burst, or an auto fire spray weapon. So we're actually going to do this in our can shoot method. And then what we'll do is we'll just loop through each of the spawn points. For spawn in bullet spawns, we'll just shoot for every one of them. But what parts do we want to indent here? Only the instantiation stuff. We don't want to actually say that we can't shoot and start a new timer every time. So we just want all the stuff where we shoot. There we go. So we'll create a new one. The difference here is now we're not going to get the muzzle's global transform. We're going to want the spawn. So the first time through the loop, it might be this one, then this one, then this one. And so in that frame, it should instantiate 3 bullets, 1 for each spawn going in that direction. Clear that, and hopefully, what kind of weapon do we have here? Auto fire. Are we going to have a spread auto fire? Yes! All right. Well, now the enemies are dropping a lot better. A lot faster. Oh, I won. We're on the last level. Okay, so we can do a spray of 3 bullets. Slight problem here is now all of our weapons will have 3 bullets unless we manually delete these, which I guess we could do. But another thing we could do is we could export an array of packed scenes. So we could export an array packed scenes, which could be our bullet spawns. Was not happy with that because I forgot to type a variable var. And now I have some bullet spawns here, and you could add as many as you want depending on what kind of weapon you had, right? So if you just had a normal weapon, you'd just drop, which we can't do. So why don't we just save all these as scenes? We'll go save branch as scene. We'll put this in the weapons, and maybe we'll just create a new folder called bullet spawns. So you could have all sorts of, have them going up and down and sideways and more dense, and just create whatever you wanted to. So we'll save that one. Save left. Save right. We can delete them all now from our tree, and then in the guns inspector we could go, let's just say this is a normal weapon and all I want is to have the bullet spawn center. And in our script now we're going to have to instantiate those when the weapon is created. So in our ready method here, why don't we just create a method called init bullet spawns, and we can do everything we need to do in that method, which doesn't exist yet. So here we go. And as part of that, we'll probably want to set that variable too. But before we can get the muzzle's children, now we actually have to add the spawn to the muzzle. So let's go for spawn, and I'm using a capital here because this is going to be a scene in an array of scenes in bullet spawn. We'll create a variable for this specific spawn, which we will instantiate with instance. We'll go muzzle dot add child, and we'll add the spawn instance. For spawn in bullets, bullet spawn isn't declared in current scope. What did I call it? Bullet spawns. That makes more sense because it's plural. It's an array. There we go. So now when our weapon is loaded, it's going to go check out how many different bullet spawns there are. It'll instantiate them all, and then it will set them all into this. It'll put them all into this list for us. So the weapon we just had, do we still have a spawn for bullets? We do. Okay, so what happens if we, let's just try something interesting and see if this is working. Let's get rid of the center one and let's just add left and right. Oopsie. We'll add left. We'll add right. And now we should have something interesting happen. Yeah, it works. We have all sorts of options to make all sorts of weapons, all sorts of guns. And we might even make a few different meshes to match all these, which we'll leave for a future video maybe, because I think this is probably good enough for now. Enjoy playing around with all these different options.